They stopped the boarding line for him. Not with a shout, not with an alarm, just a raised hand and a voice trained to sound calm while doing something cruel. "Sir, step aside." The words landed heavy. Conversations nearby faltered. Shoes froze on carpet. A boarding pass fluttered from his fingers and brushed the floor like a fallen leaf. He did not bend to pick it up. He looked straight ahead, breathing slow, as the jet bridge door remained open behind him, humming softly like it was waiting for someone else. This was Liberty American Flight 782, scheduled to leave Phoenix for Washington Dulles just after sunset. A short flight by distance, a long one by consequence. The cabin lights glowed amber, flattering faces that were used to being treated gently by systems. Retired generals, former prosecutors, old money wrapped in patience and entitlement. People who believed the world still ran on rules they understood. The man being held back did not match the picture their instincts reached for. He was black, early 60s, hair close-cropped and grey at the temples. No watch anyone could recognize from across the room. No loud confidence. His jacket was worn at the cuffs, clean but softened by years. He carried himself like someone who had learned to be still in rooms that expected him to perform. The gate agent's name tag said Linda Morales. She had the posture of a woman who had spent 3 decades standing between rules and people who believed rules were flexible. Her smile was present, but hollow. She did not look him in the eye. Her gaze hovered at his shoulder, at his chest, at anything except his face. "There's been a flag on your ticket," she said, voice low, careful. "It'll just take a moment." Behind him, a man in a golf jacket sighed loudly. Another tapped his phone. A woman with silver hair leaned toward her husband and whispered something sharp. The line behind him pressed forward, compressing the space around his back. He nodded once. No argument, no question. That alone unsettled Linda more than anger would have. She gestured him to the side, near the glass wall where the desert sky burned orange and purple over the runway. The jet bridge door slid shut with a sound that felt final. Inside the cabin, people were already stowing bags. A flight attendant closed overhead bins with practiced force. The cockpit door was still open. Laughter drifted out. Someone clapped another man on the shoulder and said, "Good to see you again." The man at the gate stood with his hands loose at his sides. His boarding pass lay near his shoe. He stared at it for a long second before crouching slowly, joints stiff, to pick it up. When he straightened, Linda noticed his hands. Steady, no tremor. "What's your name, sir?" she asked, though it was printed clearly in front of her. "Caleb Morris," he said. His voice was calm, unforced. It carried the faint rasp of someone who had spent a lifetime choosing his words carefully. She typed, paused, typed again. Her brow tightened. "Mr. Morris, I just need you to wait here while I check something with operations." "Am I delayed?" he asked. She hesitated. "I don't know yet." That was not true. She knew enough to feel it in her chest. The kind of tightness that came when a routine problem started to smell like something else. A uniformed supervisor approached from the counter, a man in his late 50s with a pinched expression and a tie knotted too tight. His badge read, Paul Henderson. He did not greet Caleb. He spoke to Linda quietly, hand cupped over his mouth. Caleb caught fragments. "Mismatch. Secondary verification. Don't board him yet." Paul finally turned. He offered a thin nod. "Mr. Morris, there seems to be an inconsistency related to your reservation. For now, we're going to need you to remain here." Caleb looked past him, through the glass, at the aircraft. He watched a baggage cart pull away. He watched a man inside settle into a window seat and sigh with relief. "That plane is leaving without me," Caleb said. Not accusing, observing. Paul's jaw flexed. "We'll see." A few feet away, 2 older men in line had stopped pretending not to listen. One shook his head. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, not quite under his breath. It was unclear who he meant. The radio at Paul's shoulder crackled. A burst of static. A voice asking about final count. Paul turned away to answer. Linda remained, fingers laced too tightly. "Is this about security?" Caleb asked her quietly. Her eyes flicked up, startled. For a split second, something like guilt surfaced. Then it vanished behind training. "I can't discuss details, sir." He nodded again. He had heard that sentence before, in different rooms, from different mouths. Inside the cabin, the door closed. The seal hissed. Engines began their low, distant whine. Someone clapped again, celebrating an on-time departure. Linda swallowed. "Please have a seat," she said, gesturing to a row of plastic chairs against the wall. Caleb sat. The chair creaked under his weight. He folded his hands in his lap and stared at the floor. His reflection stared back at him from the polished tile, fractured by light. Paul returned, voice clipped. "Mr. Morris, we're going to need to rebook you on a later flight." Caleb looked up slowly. "Why?" Paul inhaled through his nose. "At this time, we're unable to clear you for boarding." Silence stretched. The plane outside began to move, inching back from the gate. Caleb watched it like someone watching a door close on a memory. "I paid for that seat," he said, "weeks ago. I checked in early. I complied with every request." Paul shrugged, a small defensive motion. "These things happen." Linda shifted her weight. Her foot tapped, once, twice. She did not like the way this felt. She did not like the eyes on them now. A retired judge stood nearby, arms crossed, watching with open disapproval. A woman with a cane whispered, "That's not right," to anyone who would listen. Caleb stood. He was taller than Paul expected. His presence filled the narrow space without threat, without apology. He did not raise his voice. That made it worse. "Then document it," Caleb said. "Say clearly why I was denied boarding." Paul hesitated. His radio crackled again. Another voice, sharper this time. "We're pushing. Final now." Paul made a decision. "Sir, if you don't calm down, I'm going to have to involve airport security." Caleb stared at him. Not angry, studying. "I am calm." The engines outside roared louder. The plane rolled away. For the first time, something broke through Caleb's control. Not rage. Something older, wearier. He closed his eyes for a moment, then reached into his jacket and took out his phone. It was not new. The case was scuffed. He held it like an object with weight. Paul stiffened. "Sir, you can't make calls here right now." Caleb ignored him. He typed slowly, deliberately. One message. No emotion in his face as he sent it. Linda watched his thumb hover over the screen, then lower. She felt, irrationally, that she had just witnessed the start of something she did not understand. Caleb slipped the phone back into his pocket. He looked at the empty gate, at the line that had moved on without him, at the people who would forget this in minutes. "All right," he said softly. "Now we wait." The security office smelled like old coffee and disinfectant. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flattening everything into the same tired shade of grey. Caleb Morris sat in a molded plastic chair bolted to the floor, his coat folded neatly across his lap. He had not been handcuffed. He had not been offered water. Time hung heavy, unacknowledged. Across from him, Officer Raymond Holt stood with his arms crossed, boots planted wide. Late 50s, former military by posture alone. His eyes kept drifting to the file on the metal desk, then back to Caleb's face, as if the two refused to match. "You sure you don't want to tell me what this is about?" Holt said finally. His voice carried fatigue more than authority. Caleb looked at the clock on the wall. The second hand ticked loud enough to feel accusatory. I've already told 3 people everything I know. Holt exhaled through his nose. You were denied boarding due to an operational concern. That's what I've got. That's not a reason, Caleb replied. His tone was even, controlled. That's a phrase. The door opened, and Linda Morales stepped inside, cheeks flushed, hair slightly out of place. She avoided Caleb's eyes, speaking instead to Holt. Operations wants to keep him here until they get confirmation from headquarters. Holt frowned. For what? The flight's gone. Linda swallowed. They didn't say. Caleb watched her hands twist together, knuckles whitening. He recognized that posture. People did that when they were waiting for someone else to decide how bad the mistake was going to be. Linda, he said gently. She flinched at her name. You don't need to protect anyone here. Her eyes flicked to him, then away. I'm just following protocol. Holt snorted quietly. That phrase again. The radio on his shoulder crackled. He turned away to listen, his expression shifting from boredom to alertness. Say that again. A pause. His jaw tightened. Understood. He turned back, slower this time. Mr. Morris, I need you to stay seated. Caleb did not move. I wasn't planning on leaving. Outside, beyond the small frosted window, the terminal buzzed with the low roar of 1,000 small frustrations. Announcements echoed, wheels rolled, life continued. Linda's phone vibrated in her pocket. She looked at it, hesitated, then answered. Yes. Her voice dropped. Yes, he's here. Another pause. Her face drained of color. I understand. She ended the call and stood frozen, like someone who had just been told the ground beneath her feet might not be solid. What? Holt asked. Linda struggled to speak. Operations wants. They want legal looped in. Now. Holt stared at her. For a denied boarding? She nodded, eyes glassy. Apparently. Caleb shifted in his chair. The plastic creaked. Holt's eyes snapped back to him. Who did you call? Caleb met his gaze. There was no triumph there, no threat, only certainty. Someone who knows how systems work when they stop pretending nothing happened. The door opened again, harder this time. Paul Henderson stepped in, tie loosened, sweat darkening his collar. He looked like a man who had just run uphill carrying something fragile. Mr. Morris, Paul said, forcing a smile that didn't survive the journey to his eyes. There's been a misunderstanding. Caleb waited. Paul gestured vaguely. We're reviewing the decision to deny boarding. In the meantime, we'd like to get you rebooked, first class, complimentary. Holt's eyebrows shot up. Linda stared at the floor. Caleb stood slowly. He did not accept the olive branch. You told me I was a security concern. Paul waved a hand. That was overstated. Put it in writing, Caleb said. Paul blinked. Excuse me? Put it in writing, Caleb repeated. Why I was stopped, who authorized it, and why that decision changed. Silence pressed down. Holt shifted his weight, suddenly aware he was standing in the middle of something much larger than airport procedure. Paul cleared his throat. That may take some time. I have time, Caleb said. Another radio crackle, this one sharper. Holt lifted it, listened, then slowly lowered his hand. His face had changed. The casual skepticism was gone, replaced by something closer to respect. Paul, Holt said quietly. We've got an issue. Paul stiffened. What kind? Holt hesitated, then spoke. FAA just called. They want a full incident report forwarded immediately. Not summary. Full. Linda sucked in a breath. Why? Holt shook his head. They didn't say. He looked at Caleb again, but they asked for him by name. The room seemed to shrink. Paul's smile collapsed entirely. Caleb felt it then. Not satisfaction, a familiar heaviness. The knowledge that this was no longer about him. "I didn't ask for this," he said quietly. Paul laughed once, brittle. "Then why are they calling?" Caleb's eyes hardened, just a fraction. "Because when you tell someone they don't belong somewhere, you set off a chain. And chains don't stop moving just because you regret the first link." Linda's eyes filled. "We didn't mean—" "I know," Caleb interrupted softly. "That's the problem." Outside, somewhere beyond glass and concrete, phones were ringing. Emails were being drafted with shaking hands. People who had never heard his name before were reading it for the first time, trying to understand how a man with no entourage, no raised voice, no visible power had managed to reach so far, so fast. Holt straightened. "Mr. Morris, until further notice, you're free to go." Caleb shook his head. "Not yet." Paul stared at him. "What do you want?" Caleb picked up his coat, smoothing the fabric like a ritual. "I want you to remember this moment, all of you. Because the next time someone quiet stands in front of you and asks to be treated fairly, this is the memory that should answer." The radio crackled again, louder now, urgent. Holt didn't even respond before moving toward the door. Caleb followed, his steps measured, unhurried. The corridor outside was suddenly full of motion, people speaking in hushed, rapid tones. Screens flickered with alerts. Somewhere far away, a plane sat at a gate, engines cooling, paperwork piling up around it like sandbags before a flood. And in the middle of it all, a single question had begun to echo, unanswered, unstoppable. Who exactly did they stop at the gate? The conference call began without ceremony. No greeting, no introductions. Just a line clicking open, then another, until the silence itself felt occupied. Caleb Morris stood near a window overlooking the tarmac, the phone held loosely to his ear, his reflection faint in the glass. Outside, dusk had settled into something heavier. Planes taxied like slow thoughts, unsure where to go next. On the other end of the line, voices spoke in low, controlled tones. Lawyers first, always lawyers first. Men and women who sounded rested, precise, trained to remove emotion from catastrophe. They did not ask Caleb how he was. They asked where he was standing. They asked who had spoken to him. They asked for names, timestamps, exact words used. "Denied boarding," one of them repeated. "Escorted. Security involved. No written cause provided." Caleb closed his eyes for a moment. He could still hear Paul Henderson's voice, overstated. He could still see Linda Morales' hands twisting together like rope. "Yes," Caleb said. "All of that." A pause. Papers shuffling. Someone cleared their throat. "Then this is no longer a customer service issue," another voice said. Older, deeper. A man who had learned long ago that volume was unnecessary. "This is procedural exposure." Caleb opened his eyes. Across the corridor, a cluster of airport staff whispered urgently around a monitor. When one of them noticed him watching, the whispering stopped. "I don't want a spectacle," Caleb said. "I want a record." "You're going to get both," the older voice replied, not unkindly. "Whether you want it or not." The line went quiet again. Caleb felt the weight of the building shift around him, as if the airport itself had become aware it was being examined. Down the hall, Officer Holt returned, slower now, his earlier stiffness replaced by something cautious. "Mr. Morris," he said, lowering his voice. "We've been instructed to relocate you to a private office." Caleb nodded once. He followed without comment. The office was larger, softer chairs, A desk polished to a dull shine. On one wall hung a framed photograph of the airport from decades ago, when men in suits still wore hats and believed air travel was a moral act. Holt gestured for Caleb to sit. "You're not in trouble," Holt said, as if the words needed to be said aloud to be true. "I know," Caleb replied. Holt hesitated. "Then why does it feel like everyone else is?" Caleb met his eyes. "Because systems are comfortable when they're invisible. They panic when they're named." Another knock, this one sharp. The door opened and a woman entered who did not work for the airport. Mid-50s, grey blazer, hair pulled back tight. Her badge was clipped deliberately, not for identification, but as a signal. "Caleb Morris," she said, not a question. "I'm Dana Whitfield, outside counsel." She shook his hand, firm, respectful. She did not look surprised by him. That, more than anything, told him how far the call had already traveled. "We're requesting all internal communications related to the denial," Dana continued, turning slightly so Holt and a flustered operations manager who had followed her in could hear. "Emails, chat logs, voice recordings. Immediately." The operations manager sputtered. "That's highly irregular." Dana looked at him with mild curiosity. "So is denying boarding without cause." Silence followed, the kind that stripped excuses bare. Caleb leaned back in his chair. For the first time since the gate, he allowed himself to feel the ache in his shoulders, the quiet fatigue that came from years of choosing restraint over release. He watched Holt shift uncomfortably, watched the manager's face flush, watched Dana's pen hover, waiting. "I want to be clear," Caleb said finally. His voice was low, but it carried. "I am not accusing anyone here of malice." The manager exhaled in relief too early. "I am accusing the system of convenience," Caleb continued. "And convenience, when left unchecked, becomes something else." Dana nodded once, like a judge acknowledging a point well made. Another phone buzzed, then another. Outside the office, footsteps multiplied. The airport's rhythm had changed. There was a tempo now, urgent, uneven. Somewhere, a decision had been elevated. Somewhere else, someone was realizing their name would be attached to it. Holt cleared his throat. "There's talk of holding the aircraft that just departed." Caleb looked at him. "On what grounds?" "Operational review," Holt said. "Nothing official yet." Caleb felt a flicker then. Not triumph. Responsibility. The awareness that a line had been crossed and could not be uncrossed. "I didn't ask for anyone to be punished," he said. Dana met his gaze. "You asked to be treated fairly." The operations manager laughed nervously. "This is getting out of hand." Dana turned on him. "No," she said. "It's finally in hand. You're just not used to seeing it." Through the window, Caleb watched as a ground crew vehicle stopped abruptly near a gate. A plane's lights flickered. Not off, just paused. He thought of the people on board, the retirees, the former officials, the ones who believed order was a given. He wondered how many of them had seen what happened at the gate, how many had chosen not to look. Caleb stood. The room quieted instantly. "Whatever happens next," he said, "happens because a choice was made earlier. Not by me." Dana closed her folder. "This is only the beginning," she said. Caleb nodded. He knew. He could feel it now, moving through the building, through the cables and phones and contracts that held the world together. The story was no longer about a missed flight. It was about what happened when a quiet man refused to disappear, and a system realized too late that silence was not the same thing as powerlessness. The announcement came softly at first, almost apologetic, the way bad news often tries to disguise itself. A chime. A breath. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We are currently holding at the gate due to an operational review. Please remain seated." Inside the aircraft that had left without Caleb Morris, the words rippled through the cabin like a draft through an old house. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. A man in a navy blazer glanced at his watch. A woman with a silk scarf frowned and leaned toward the aisle, searching for a face that could explain this to her. The engines, which should have been climbing, settled into a low, uncertain hum. In seat 1 Delta, Richard Hale shifted uncomfortably. He was 71, retired, former Deputy Undersecretary of Transportation, a man who knew how systems were supposed to work because he had once helped design them. He had noticed the disturbance at the gate, noticed the way the line froze, noticed the man who did not argue, did not plead, did not raise his voice. Richard had told himself it wasn't his business. That thought sat poorly with him now. Across the aisle, a younger man tapped his phone and shook his head. "They're saying something about a procedural hold," he muttered to no one in particular. "That never happens this late." A flight attendant moved through the cabin, smile fixed, eyes scanning. She stopped near Richard. "Can I get you anything, sir?" He studied her face. She looked tired, not irritated, concerned. "What's going on?" he asked gently. She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "We've been asked to wait. That's all we know." Richard nodded. He leaned back, folded his hands, and stared at the closed cockpit door. He had learned long ago that when pilots closed themselves off like that, something above them had changed. Back in the terminal, the air felt different. Word moved faster than bodies. Screens updated. Staff clustered, then dispersed, then clustered again. Caleb Morris stood near the private office window, watching the controlled chaos spread like a slow stain. Dana Whitfield was already on her third call, her voice calm, clipped, precise. "We're not requesting an immediate stop," she said. "We're requesting preservation. Preserve data, preserve decisions, preserve responsibility." Caleb listened, his attention drifting to a man arguing loudly at the service desk. Mid-60s, red-faced, jacket slung over one shoulder like a flag. "I have connections," the man barked. "You can't just hold a plane because someone felt slighted." Caleb recognized the tone. Not anger, panic dressed as entitlement. A supervisor approached Dana, eyes darting. "We need to understand the scope of this," he said. Dana didn't look at him. "So do we." The supervisor's jaw tightened. "This affects hundreds of people." Caleb spoke before Dana could answer. "It affected one person first." The supervisor turned, startled. He seemed to take in Caleb for the first time, really look. "Sir, with respect, you're not the only one inconvenienced here." Caleb met his gaze steadily. "With respect, inconvenience is not the issue. Process is." The supervisor opened his mouth, then closed it. He walked away without another word. In the cabin, the murmurs grew louder. Another announcement, this one firmer. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. The aircraft is currently unable to proceed." A woman stood despite the instruction. "This is ridiculous," she said, voice sharp. "We've done nothing wrong." Richard Hale rose slowly beside her. He placed a hand on the armrest, grounding himself. "Ma'am," he said, calm but carrying. "Sometimes when nothing seems wrong on the surface, that's when something important is being examined underneath." She stared at him. "Are you saying this is necessary?" He paused. "I'm saying it might be." She sat, not satisfied, but quieted. In the cockpit, the captain held the phone away from his ear and stared at his first officer. "They want us to document every decision made at the gate," he said, "including the denial." The first officer swallowed. "That's unusual." "It's deliberate," the captain replied. He rubbed his forehead. "Someone up the chain is nervous." Back in the terminal, A second uniformed officer approached Caleb, younger this time, eyes wide. "Sir, there's been a request to speak with you from headquarters." "Not law enforcement. Corporate." Caleb nodded once. "Tell them I'm available." Dana covered her phone and leaned toward him. "They're moving faster than I expected," she murmured. Caleb exhaled slowly. That usually means they're afraid of what they'll find if they don't. The call came through moments later. A voice polished by boardrooms and crisis management filled the room. "Mr. Morris, this is Alan Brooks, Senior Vice President of Operations." Caleb closed his eyes briefly. He could picture the man. Perfect teeth, perfect posture, perfect distance from the ground floor. "We regret the inconvenience," Brooks continued. "We're committed to resolving this quickly." "I'm sure you are," Caleb replied. Brooks cleared his throat. "At this point, we're exploring options to mitigate impact." Caleb opened his eyes. "On whom?" A pause. "On everyone involved." "Be specific," Caleb said, "because so far, mitigation has meant removing the quiet person and reassuring the loud ones." Silence followed, long enough to be instructive. "We need time," Brooks said finally. "You've had time," Caleb replied. "What you need now is accountability." Dana watched Brooks's face flicker on the video screen, the confidence thinning. She had seen this before. The moment when corporate language ran out and something real pressed in. In the cabin, a ripple moved through the rows as phones buzzed almost in unison. Messages, alerts, a headline forming without words. People began to understand that this was not a delay caused by weather or mechanics. This was human. Richard Hale checked his phone. He read the message twice. Then he looked up, eyes narrowing. He felt a familiar weight settle in his chest, the kind he used to feel when a hearing was about to begin. Back at the gate, Caleb felt it too. The shift from confusion to recognition, from irritation to unease. "This is bigger than me," he said quietly, to no one in particular. Dana nodded. "It always is." Outside, the aircraft remained still. Lights on, doors sealed. A machine designed to move, held in place by something far less visible. Inside the terminal, people whispered. Staff avoided eye contact. Somewhere, deep in the structure of the company, a meeting was being called, calendars cleared, legal pads opened. The chain Caleb had spoken of was tightening now, link by link, decision by decision. And though no one had said it aloud yet, a truth was beginning to settle over the airport like nightfall. This was no longer about whether one man belonged on a plane. It was about whether a system could survive, being forced to look at itself. The boardroom came online, one square at a time. Faces framed by neutral walls. Bookshelves chosen for effect. Flags placed just out of view. The silence before anyone spoke was deliberate. A quiet assertion of control that usually worked. Alan Brooks sat centered on the screen, shoulders squared, voice steady. "Let's keep this contained," he said. "We do not need escalation." A woman to his left adjusted her glasses. General counsel, early 60s. Reputation for caution. "Containment assumes the issue is cosmetic," she replied. "This is procedural exposure with optics attached." Another square flickered. Operations. A man who had built his career on metrics and on time departures. "The aircraft is still at the gate," he said. "Passengers are restless. Crew morale is deteriorating." Brooks nodded. "We can apologize, offer compensation, rebook the gentleman." The lawyer shook her head. "He was already rebooked. That is not the point." Brooks tightened his jaw. "Then what is?" She leaned closer to the camera. "The record. Who said what? Who authorized removal? And why the decision changed only after external contact?" A pause. No one liked that question. Back at the airport, Caleb Morris sat alone near the window again, this time with a cup of water someone had quietly placed beside him. He had not asked for it. He had noticed the hand tremble as it was set down. He watched the plane outside, still breathing, still waiting. Dana Whitfield stood nearby, phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was low, controlled. "No, we are not requesting damages at this stage. We are requesting preservation and acknowledgement." She listened. Because once the record exists, everything else follows. Caleb closed his eyes briefly. He felt the familiar pull of doubt, the old question that never fully left him. Was this worth it? The delay, the attention, the weight that came with refusing to step aside. He thought of the gate agent's voice, flag, of Paul Henderson's shrug. These things happen. Of the quiet relief in their faces when they believed he would go away, the doubt passed. In the cabin, tempers frayed. A man stood and demanded answers. A woman cried softly into her scarf. Richard Hale remained seated, hands folded, watching patterns repeat themselves the way they always did before a reckoning. He had seen this before, in hearings, in failures no one wanted to own. A flight attendant approached him again. Her smile was gone now. "Sir," she whispered, "do you know what's happening?" He met her eyes. "I suspect someone important was treated as if he wasn't." She inhaled sharply. "Is that bad?" Richard answered honestly. "It depends on whether the system is capable of learning." Back in the boardroom, the lawyer spoke again. "We need to consider the long view." Brooks scoffed lightly. "This is one passenger." She didn't flinch. "It's one incident. Those are different things." Another voice joined, older, measured. "A board member. Who is he?" The room stilled. The lawyer chose her words carefully. "Caleb Morris is a private individual. No public profile. But his affiliations place him adjacent to infrastructure we depend on." Brooks leaned forward. "Adjacent how?" She looked directly into the camera. "Enough that if this becomes adversarial, we will not control the tempo." Silence. Real silence this time. Back at the airport, a uniformed assistant approached Dana with a tablet. "Ma'am, headquarters is requesting a direct conversation with Mr. Morris." Dana looked at Caleb. "Your call." Caleb stood slowly. His joints protested. He ignored them. Put them on. The screen lit up. Alan Brooks appeared, his expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Morris," he began, "I want to personally apologize for your experience today." Caleb waited. "We are conducting an internal review," Brooks continued. "There were missteps. We intend to correct them." Caleb studied the man's eyes. He had learned to read what people avoided. "You intend to correct behavior," he said, "or documentation?" Brooks stiffened. "Both." "That's not an answer," Caleb replied. Brooks exhaled slowly. "What would you like to see happen?" Caleb did not raise his voice. He did not lean in. "I want the record to reflect what actually occurred. I want the language changed from operational concern to denied without cause. I want the people involved to be retrained, not sacrificed. And I want assurance that the next quiet person is not treated as expendable." Brooks blinked. He had expected numbers, settlements, silence. "That's unusual." Caleb nodded. So was today. Brooks glanced off screen. Someone was speaking to him. He covered the microphone briefly, then returned. "If we do this," he said carefully, "there will be consequences." "There already are," Caleb replied. "You're just deciding who carries them." In the cabin, the captain's voice came over the intercom, no longer polished. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are continuing to hold. Thank you for your patience. Patience. The word landed differently now. Richard Hale closed his eyes. He felt the shift. The moment when the institution realized delay was no longer the risk. Exposure was. Back at the gate, Caleb ended the call. Dana searched his face. "They'll move," she said, slowly, "but they will." Caleb looked out at the plane one more time. "They always do," he said, "once they understand the cost of not moving." Outside, the aircraft remained still, engines idling like a held breath. Inside, offices and boardrooms miles away, people began to write things down they had never intended to. The system was no longer asking how to make this go away. It was asking how to survive what it had already done. The call ended, but the air did not relax. It tightened, like a muscle bracing for impact. Dana Whitfield slipped her phone into her blazer and looked around the terminal, taking in the small movements that gave everything away. A supervisor whispering into his sleeve. A gate agent refreshing a screen that no longer updated. Two pilots standing too close together, voices low, faces drawn. Caleb Morris felt the eyes on him now. Not curious, assessing. The kind of look people give when they realize the ground rules they assumed were stable have begun to slide. He did not enjoy it. He had never enjoyed being the center of anything. Attention, to him, had always been a cost, not a reward. "Do you want to sit somewhere quieter?" Dana asked. Caleb shook his head. If this is going to happen, it should happen where everyone can see it. Across the terminal, a woman in her late 60s struggled to lift a carry-on from the floor. A younger man stepped past her without noticing. Caleb moved instinctively, lifting the bag with an apologetic smile and setting it on the chair beside her. "Thank you," she said, surprised. He nodded and returned to his place by the window. The small kindness grounded him, reminded him who this was for. The aircraft door reopened. A ripple of motion ran through the cabin as heads turned. A flight attendant stepped out, face pale, eyes scanning the gate until they landed on Dana. She walked quickly, posture tight. "They want the captain to speak with you," she said, barely above a whisper. "Not officially. Off record." Dana glanced at Caleb. He considered for a moment, then nodded. "All right." They walked together down the jet bridge, the hollow tunnel amplifying every step. The smell of fuel and recycled air mixed, familiar and unsettling. At the aircraft threshold, the captain stood waiting, mid-50s, lines etched deep at the corners of his eyes. A man who had carried responsibility long enough to know when it was no longer fully his. "Mr. Morris," he said, extending a hand. "I'm Captain Lawrence Keene." Caleb shook it, firm. "Captain." Keene closed the cockpit door behind them. The hum of the plane surrounded them, alive but restrained. "I want you to know," Keene said, "I did not make the initial call to deny boarding." Caleb met his gaze. "I believe you." Keene exhaled. "But I did authorize the hold, and I need to understand what we're dealing with." Dana stepped in smoothly. "You're dealing with an incident that has already outgrown the cabin," she said. "At this point, clarity matters more than speed." Keene rubbed his temples. "Operations is telling me to prepare for a cancellation." Caleb looked past him, into the cabin. He saw Richard Hale seated near the aisle, watching intently. When their eyes met, Richard gave a small nod. Not approval, recognition. "Captain," Caleb said, "I don't want these passengers stranded because of me." Keene's mouth twitched. "With respect, sir, they're not stranded because of you. They're waiting because something upstream is being questioned." Caleb absorbed that. He nodded once. Back in the terminal, the mood shifted again. Screens flickered. A new message appeared at the gate. Delay pending review. No departure time listed. Phones buzzed. Voices rose, then fell. People began to realize that arguing would not move this forward. Paul Henderson emerged from behind the counter, looking smaller than before. He approached Caleb cautiously, hands open. "Mr. Morris," he said, "corporate wants to issue a formal statement." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "Already?" Paul winced. "They're asking for your input." Caleb considered him. The man's arrogance from earlier was gone, replaced by something like fear, or maybe understanding. "Then tell them to be accurate," Caleb said. "That's all I ask." Paul nodded quickly and retreated, nearly colliding with a woman in a tailored suit who moved with purpose through the crowd. She introduced herself briskly to Dana. "Marianne Cole, compliance." Dana's expression tightened. That was fast. Marianne gave a thin smile. Fast enough to be late. She turned to Caleb. "Sir, I need to inform you that an emergency compliance review has been initiated." Caleb looked at her steadily. "On what scope?" "Gate procedures," Marianne said. "Escalation authority, bias training adherence, documentation standards." She paused. "And communications with federal oversight." A murmur ran through the nearby passengers as the words filtered out. Federal oversight carried weight. It always had. Richard Hale stood then, slowly, leaning on the armrest for balance. He addressed no one in particular, but his voice carried. "For those of you wondering," he said, "this is what accountability looks like. It's uncomfortable. That doesn't make it wrong." A few heads nodded. Others looked away. Caleb felt a tightening in his chest. Not fear, something heavier. He was aware now of the size of the wake behind him. He had not intended to move so much water. Dana sensed it. "You okay?" she asked quietly. He answered honestly. "I'm thinking about the cost." She followed his gaze to the cabin, the waiting faces, the hands clutching phones and itineraries. "Sometimes," she said, "the cost is already paid. You're just making it visible." The intercom chimed again. This time, the voice was different. Not the captain. A corporate tone, rehearsed but strained. "Ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate your patience. Liberty American Airways is conducting a comprehensive review related to boarding procedures. Your safety and dignity are our highest priorities." A ripple of disbelief passed through the cabin. Safety and dignity. Words rarely paired out loud. Caleb closed his eyes briefly. He thought of his father, who had once told him that institutions only change when they are forced to say the quiet part out loud. Marianne Cole's phone buzzed. She read the message, her face tightening. "Board wants a briefing. Now." Dana straightened. "You'll get it." Marianne hesitated, then addressed Caleb directly. "Sir, I need to ask, are you prepared for what comes next?" Caleb met her gaze. He thought of the woman with the carry-on, of the gate agent's trembling hands, of the man who had stepped past without noticing, of the plane that still hadn't moved. "Yes," he said, "because this isn't about me getting on that flight anymore." Outside the windows, the sky had darkened fully. Runway lights burned bright, unwavering. The aircraft remained at the gate, a symbol now, not a vehicle. Somewhere miles away, a calendar invitation had just gone out. Subject line vague, attendees mandatory. The kind of meeting that changed careers. Back at the gate, Caleb stood quietly as the world adjusted around him. He did not smile. He did not gloat. He waited. Because he knew something the system was only beginning to understand. When you force a quiet man to stop moving, you give him time. And time, when combined with truth, was far more dangerous than anger ever had been. The night deepened, and with it came the reckoning that no announcement could soften. The terminal lights dimmed slightly as part of the evening cycle, but no one relaxed. The aircraft still sat at the gate, doors sealed, Engines quiet now, no longer breathing. Silence had replaced anticipation, and silence carried weight. Caleb Morris stood near the window, hands clasped behind his back, watching a line of ground crew walk past with clipboards held like shields. He felt the pull of fatigue in his lower spine, the dull ache of standing too long, at an age when the body kept its own ledger. He ignored it. He had learned long ago that discomfort was sometimes the cost of clarity. Dana Whitfield returned from a side corridor, her expression sharpened. "The board is split," she said quietly. "Half want to de-escalate publicly. Half want to fight quietly." Caleb did not turn. "And none want to admit what actually happened." Dana nodded. "Not yet." Nearby, Paul Henderson sat alone at the counter, tie removed, staring at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. The bravado that had once propped him up was gone. Every few minutes, he glanced at Caleb, then away, like a man trying to remember the moment before he chose wrong. Linda Moranis stood a few steps behind Paul, arms folded tight across her chest. She had been crying earlier. Now she was hollowed out, eyes red but dry. When she finally spoke, her voice surprised even her. "I should have stopped it." Caleb turned. Slowly. He looked at her fully for the first time. "Stopped what?" She swallowed. "The assumption. The easy path. I saw it happening and I let it happen because it was faster." Her hands trembled. "I've done this job for 30 years. I tell myself I know people. I was wrong." Caleb studied her face. He saw fear there, not of punishment, of recognition. "Knowing people," he said gently, "starts with listening to them." Linda nodded, tears welling again. She did not argue. She did not defend herself. That mattered. Across the terminal, a small cluster of passengers had gathered around Richard Hale. Word had spread about who he was, what he had once been. They asked him questions in low voices. Why would they hold a plane this long? What happens next? Is this even legal? Richard answered carefully. When institutions feel threatened, they retreat into procedure. When they feel exposed, they reach for legitimacy. That's where we are now. A man asked, "So, do we get home tonight?" Richard hesitated. That depends on whether they choose dignity or denial. The overhead screens flickered again. A new status appeared. Cancelled, pending review. A groan rippled through the crowd, followed by anger, then disbelief. A woman cursed under her breath. A man slammed his bag onto the floor. Caleb closed his eyes. The cost had arrived. Dana watched him closely. "You didn't want this." "No," Caleb said. "But wanting doesn't change responsibility." A man pushed through the crowd toward him, face flushed, voice already rising. "This is because of you," he snapped. "You could have just taken the next flight." Caleb met his gaze calmly. "I already did." The man faltered, thrown off by the lack of defensiveness. "Then why?" "Because if I disappear quietly," Caleb said, "the next person will too. And the one after that." The man opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked around at the restless crowd, the confused staff, the immobilized plane. His anger drained into something less certain. He turned away without another word. Dana's phone vibrated again. She glanced at the screen and let out a slow breath. "Emergency session called. Federal observers invited." Caleb's jaw tightened slightly. That was new. They're taking this higher. "They don't have a choice," Dana replied. "Once federal eyes are on it, this stops being an internal matter." At the far end of the terminal, a television flickered to life. A breaking news banner crawled across the bottom. Travelers slowed, watching. A reporter stood outside the airport, hair unmoved by the wind, voice steady. Liberty American Airways has grounded at least one aircraft following an internal review of a denied boarding incident earlier this evening. Sources say federal transportation officials are monitoring the situation. Linda covered her mouth. Paul closed his eyes. Caleb felt the familiar tightening again. The moment when a private injustice became a public question. He had lived long enough to know that once that line was crossed, there was no going back. Dana leaned closer. "They're going to ask you to make this go away." Caleb nodded. "And I won't. Then they'll look for a face to blame." "I know." She searched his expression. "Are you ready to be that face?" Caleb thought of his father again, of standing beside him as a boy, watching a factory close while men argued about numbers instead of people. He remembered the silence on the drive home, the lesson embedded in it. "Yes," he said, "because if it's me, at least the story is true." The terminal grew louder as cancellations cascaded across screens. Staff scrambled. Apologies multiplied and lost their meaning. Somewhere in the chaos, a young gate agent sat down on the floor and put her head in her hands. Caleb walked over and knelt beside her, joints protesting. "You okay?" She shook her head. "I don't know how to fix this." He offered a small, tired smile. "You don't fix systems alone. You just decide where you stand when they're exposed." She nodded, wiping her face. When Caleb stood again, Dana was watching him with something like admiration tempered by worry. "They're going to call you soon," she said. Caleb looked out at the darkened runway, lights stretching into the distance like unanswered questions. "Then let them," he replied. Because somewhere above the noise, above the anger and the fear, a truth had taken hold. This was no longer a delay. It was a line being drawn. The call came just after the terminal clock flipped to 10. Not loud, not urgent. A vibration against Dana Whitfield's palm that she felt before she saw. She glanced at the screen, then at Caleb, and for the first time that night her composure cracked just enough to reveal concern. "It's them," she said. Caleb nodded. He had been expecting it. The waiting had a shape now, a direction. He followed Dana into a small conference room off the concourse, glass walls fogged by breath and fingerprints. Inside, a single screen glowed. Faces assembled again, but the tone was different. Less choreography, more strain. Alan Brooks appeared, flanked by two others Caleb did not recognize. One was older, white hair, eyes steady. The other younger, jaw clenched, fingers tapping out of frame. "Mr. Morris," Brooks began, "thank you for taking this call." Caleb said nothing. Silence was his leverage. The older man leaned forward. "I'm Samuel Grant, interim board chair." He did not smile. "We're going to speak plainly." Caleb met his gaze. That would be new. Grant absorbed the comment. "The situation has escalated beyond what we anticipated. Federal observers have requested documentation. Media interest is increasing. The aircraft has been cancelled." He paused. "We need to stabilize." Dana folded her arms. "Stabilization requires truth," she said. Grant inclined his head. "Agreed." Brooks interjected, tension sharpening his voice. "We are prepared to issue a formal statement acknowledging procedural failure and implicit bias. We will commit to retraining, third-party review, and—" Caleb raised a hand. Brooks stopped mid-sentence. "Before we talk about what you will say," Caleb said, "we need to talk about what you did." Another pause. The younger man shifted. Grant nodded. "Proceed." "You denied boarding without cause," Caleb said. "You labeled compliance as disruption. You escalated silence as threat. Then you tried to correct the record, only after you realized I would not disappear. Grant's expression tightened. That is a harsh interpretation. It is an accurate one, Caleb replied, and accuracy is the only thing that matters now. Grant exchanged a look with Brooks. What do you want? There it was. The question that always arrived dressed as reason. Caleb felt the weight of it settle across his shoulders. This was the moment people misunderstood him most. They assumed motive was transactional. The dignity had a price. I want the language preserved, he said, in your internal report, in your external statement. No euphemisms, no operational smoke. Brooks frowned. That exposes us. Yes, Caleb said. That's the point. Grant leaned back. And after that, Caleb continued, you will initiate a compliance review with authority to suspend decision rights at the gate. Not training videos. Authority. The younger man scoffed. That's extreme. Caleb looked at him. So is denying a man his seat because he didn't look familiar? Silence again. He could feel it spreading, uncomfortable and necessary. Grant cleared his throat. You're asking us to admit fault in a way that carries long-term consequence. Caleb nodded. I know. And what do you gain from this? Brooks asked, unable to stop himself. Caleb's voice softened, just slightly. I lose something. That landed harder than any threat. Dana glanced at him, surprised. I lose the comfort of anonymity, Caleb said. I lose the ability to pass through places quietly. I become a reference point, a cautionary tale, a name people will use when they want to avoid doing the right thing, until it's too late. Grant watched him closely. Then why do it? Caleb thought of the woman with the carry-on, of the young agent on the floor, of Linda Morales standing hollowed out by recognition. Because someone has to, he said. The screen went still. No one spoke for a long moment. When Grant finally did, his voice was lower. We will do what you've asked. Brooks looked startled. Sam, Grant held up a hand. We are already paying the cost. This decides whether it means something. Caleb exhaled. He had not realized how tight his chest had been until that moment. There will be backlash, Grant added. Criticism, shareholders, lawmakers. Caleb nodded. There always is. The call ended without ceremony. No promises beyond the necessary. No thanks. That was fine. Gratitude was not the goal. When the screen went dark, Dana sat heavily in a chair. You know they're going to turn this into a headline, she said. Caleb leaned against the glass wall. His reflection stared back at him, older than he felt, steadier than he expected. Headlines fade, he said. Records don't. Outside the room, the terminal moved in slow motion now. People lining up for vouchers, staff handing out apologies like receipts. A television replaying the same few facts with different voices. Richard Hale approached quietly, Kane tapping once on the floor before stopping. I watched your call, he said. Caleb raised an eyebrow. Not the content, Richard clarified. The posture. You didn't ask for mercy. You asked for accuracy. Caleb smiled faintly. I've learned the difference. Richard nodded. So have I. Took me longer. A young man approached hesitantly, the one who had accused Caleb earlier. I was wrong, he said. I didn't see it. Caleb studied him, then nodded once. Most people don't, until they do. The terminal clock ticked past 10:15. The night pressed in against the glass. Somewhere, documents were being rewritten with care instead of convenience. Somewhere else, a career calculation was being made under fluorescent light. Dana stood and straightened her blazer. "This isn't over," she said. Caleb looked out at the runway, dark and patient. "It never is," he replied. But something had shifted. Not everything. Not enough. Yet. A system had been forced to speak plainly. And that, Caleb knew, was a beginning that came with a cost he would carry long after the lights went back on. The morning came without relief. Dawn crept in pale and thin, washing the terminal in a tired grey that made everything look older than it was. Overnight travelers slept curled around their luggage. Coffee cups littered the floor like evidence of small defeats. The airport had the quiet of a place that had run out of excuses. Caleb Morris stood near the windows again, jacket folded over one arm, watching the first ground crews of the day move with exaggerated care. Every step now was documented, every radio call measured. The system had learned, at least temporarily, how to be afraid of itself. Dana Whitfield returned from a call, her face set. "They released the statement," she said. Caleb did not ask what it said. He knew the shape of these things. And it's being torn apart," Dana replied. "Some say it's overdue. Some say it's an overcorrection. A few are calling you reckless." Caleb nodded. That was always coming. A television mounted above the seating area played the footage again. A still frame now, paused on a blurry image of him standing at the gate, boarding pass in hand. The caption beneath read, "Denied boarding incident under federal review." No adjectives yet. Those would come later. Richard Hale stood nearby, leaning on his cane, eyes fixed on the screen. "They'll simplify it," he said quietly. "They always do. Heroes and villains. Easy to digest, hard to learn from." Caleb turned to him. "You think it will matter anyway?" Richard smiled thinly. "I think it already does. The question is, who remembers it for the right reasons?" Across the terminal, Linda Morales sat alone at a table she had wiped twice already. Her uniform jacket was folded beside her, like something she no longer trusted herself to wear. When she saw Caleb approach, she stiffened, then stood. "I've been suspended," she said, the words flat. "Pending review." Caleb studied her face. She looked smaller than before. Not defeated. Exposed. "How do you feel about that?" Linda hesitated. "Angry," she admitted. "Ashamed. And relieved." He nodded. "Those don't cancel each other out." She swallowed. "They asked me to write a statement. Everything I saw, everything I assumed." Her voice shook. "I don't know if it helps." "It does," Caleb said. "Truth always helps. It just doesn't always protect." Linda nodded slowly, absorbing that. "I'm sorry," she said again, quieter this time. "I know," Caleb replied. And he meant it. Dana watched the exchange from a distance. She had seen apologies offered like currency. This one was different. It cost something. Paul Henderson passed by without looking up, carrying a box of personal items. His name badge was gone. His shoulders slumped forward, as if the weight of the night had finally found a place to rest. He did not speak. Caleb did not stop him. Consequences, once set in motion, did not require commentary. A young reporter approached cautiously, microphone held low, eyes searching for permission. "Mr. Morris," she began, "can you tell us why you didn't just take the rebooking?" Caleb looked at her. Really looked. She was nervous. New. Trying to ask the right question. "Because silence is expensive," he said. "You just don't see the bill until much later." She nodded, scribbling quickly. "Do you think this will change anything?" Caleb glanced around the terminal, at the new compliance notices taped to counters, at the staff speaking more slowly, more carefully, at the passengers watching, not scrolling. "I think it already has," he said. "The question is whether it lasts." The reporter thanked him and moved on, already shaping the quote into something smaller. Dana checked her phone again. "Federal Review officially opened," she said. "They're requesting interviews, including you." Caleb exhaled. "Figures." "You don't have to," Dana added. He shook his head. "Yes, I do." She searched his face. "You're tired." "Yes," he said, but not finished. The sun finally broke through the clouds, casting a pale strip of light across the floor. Caleb stepped into it, feeling its warmth briefly, like a hand on his shoulder. This was the part no one filmed. Not the confrontation, not the calls. The aftermath. The quiet accounting of what had been lost and what had been exposed. He thought of the anonymity he would not get back. The invitations that would stop coming. The rooms that would go silent when he entered. He felt the weight of that future settle in. And still, he did not regret it. Because somewhere, at some other gate, a quiet person would stand their ground a second longer. Because a system, once named, could never fully pretend again. Caleb turned away from the window as Dana joined him. "Ready?" she asked. He nodded. "Let's finish what we started." The hearing room smelled faintly of paper and old air, the kind that never quite circulates. Caleb Morris sat at the long table beneath fluorescent lights that flattened every face into the same weary truth. His jacket was folded on the chair behind him, sleeves creased from a night spent awake. Across the room, officials shuffled documents with the careful gravity of people who understood that every word would outlive them. The seal on the wall was large, deliberate, meant to remind everyone that this place did not belong to any one person. Caleb had been in rooms like this before. Not often, not comfortably. Rooms where silence carried more weight than speech, and patience mattered more than charm. Dana Whitfield sat at his right, legal pad untouched. She knew better than to interrupt what was about to happen. This was not an argument. It was a record. The chairwoman adjusted her glasses and cleared her throat. She was in her late 60s, hair silver, posture unyielding. "Mr. Morris," she said, voice level. "You understand this proceeding is not adversarial." Caleb nodded. "I understand. We are here to determine whether established procedures were followed, and whether those procedures themselves require revision," she continued. "You are not on trial." Caleb met her eyes steadily. "Neither was I at the gate." A ripple moved through the room. Not shock, recognition. The chairwoman did not bristle. She inclined her head slightly, acknowledging the point without conceding ground. "Begin with what happened," she said. Caleb spoke slowly. He described the raised hand, the request to step aside, the absence of explanation. He did not embellish, he did not dramatize. He spoke the way men speak when they are done proving themselves. When he finished, the room was quiet. Even the papers had stopped moving. One of the panel members leaned forward. "At any point, were you informed of a specific safety concern?" "No," Caleb said. "Were you informed of a behavioral concern?" "No." "Were you informed of any violation?" "No." The questions continued, precise and methodical. Caleb answered each with the same restraint. When the panel asked about the phone call, he did not deflect. "I contacted counsel," he said. "Not regulators, not media. Counsel." "And why," another member asked, "did you believe that was necessary?" Caleb paused. He could feel the old instinct to minimize, to smooth edges. He let it pass. "Because I recognized the pattern," he said. Silence, followed by procedure, followed by erasure. Dana's pen moved once, then stopped. The chairwoman folded her hands. "You understand the consequences of what followed?" Caleb nodded. Yes. And you accept responsibility for your role in escalating the matter. I accept responsibility for refusing to disappear, Caleb replied. His voice did not rise. It did not need to. A murmur spread, quickly stilled. The chairwoman studied him for a long moment. Then she spoke again, quieter now. You should know that not everyone agrees with your actions. Caleb almost smiled. Almost. I would have been more concerned if they did. The hearing recessed just before noon. Outside, reporters waited behind a thin barrier, cameras poised, hunger thinly veiled as curiosity. Caleb did not stop. He did not wave. He walked past with Dana, steps measured, face composed. The afternoon stretched long and unresolved. Statements were issued, clarifications followed, retractions of retractions. The company's stock dipped, then steadied. Analysts argued on television about precedent and perception, about whether this would chill authority or restore it. Caleb watched none of it. He sat instead in a quiet corner of the terminal, watching people move. A father tying his daughter's shoe. A veteran with a cap worn soft by years of use. A flight attendant kneeling to speak to a nervous passenger at eye level. Small things. Real things. Linda Morales passed by once, unnoticed by most. She had changed clothes, hair pulled back simply. When she saw Caleb, she stopped. I gave them everything, she said. Not defensively, just plainly. Caleb nodded. That matters. She hesitated. I don't know what comes next. Neither do I, Caleb said. But knowing is overrated. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Caleb finally boarded a different flight. Not first class. An aisle seat near the wing. He did not mind. As he settled in, a man beside him glanced over, recognition flickering. You're the guy, the man said softly. Caleb met his gaze. I'm just a passenger. The man nodded, as if that answered something important. As the plane lifted into the air, Caleb felt the familiar press of gravity ease. He closed his eyes briefly, letting the hum steady him. He thought of the cost he would continue to pay, the rooms that would grow colder, the invitations that would never arrive. He accepted it. Legacy was not built by comfort. Somewhere below, offices glowed late into the night. Policies were being rewritten by hands that shook less than they had the night before. Somewhere else, a gate agent would pause before making an easy decision. The change was not complete. It never was. But it had begun. When the plane leveled off, the seatbelt sign dimmed. A flight attendant passed, offering water. Caleb accepted, thanking her by name after reading her badge. She looked surprised, then smiled, a real one. He stared out the window at the dark, endless sky. Power, he thought, was not volume. It was endurance. It was the willingness to stand still long enough for truth to catch up. The world would move on. It always did. But some moments left marks beneath the surface, invisible yet permanent. This was one of them. If this story resonated with you, tap like, subscribe for more, and comment 3 words below.